Hi there everyone, my name's Steve Wright. I'm the composer behind this entry for the Westworld scoring competition. If you're at this video, it's probably because you've seen my video and you wanted to see a little bit more about how I went about creating all the sounds. As the description says, it was all done with violin after the changing genre moment. So I was hoping this video might just go into a little bit more detail about how I went about recording, processing and producing the various sounds which are used in this. As you can see, here is the project in all its glory, lots of different tracks. So I'm going to be very brief and just go through specifically the sounds. There are lots of mixing techniques are used in this, but I'm not going to go into that because there are tons of videos online that talk about mixing techniques more, and they will do a far better job than I would ever do on that. So starting with first things first, I'll just explain that the very opening was approaching a more normal way using sound libraries and VSTs and whatnot. And that is all located in a different project. So that's this little section here. So I'm not going to talk about that. I'm only going to talk about this moment onwards when we switch genre. From that moment on is when we just use violin. So as with any cue, I started by doing a very, very quick piano sketch. And here it is. I'm not going to play it to you now, but again, just to give you a little idea of my process. I'd watched the scene a few times by this point, so I set a rough tempo and I had a rough idea of what was happening. So this more or less resembles roughly what happens, although a lot of it ends up in the garbage, but it just gives me a starting point of somewhere to start. So once I've done that, I've got a brief, a rough outline of the overall cue, and then I can, normally I'd get into it using traditional sounds, but on this project it was a bit different because I obviously had to create all the sounds myself. So at that point, I started delving into creating various sounds to start applying in the ways I felt it had to be applied. So I'm just going to go from the top and work my way down. So the first thing, and actually probably the most difficult thing to get right, was the drums. Now, there are a variety of drums in this project. There are low thuds, which sound like this, which are kind of sound a bit like a heartbeat. They are these violin snaps, which are a bit more kind of top-endy. But the most difficult element of all of this was that you get this tom sound. Now, I call them toms. They don't really sound like toms in any way, but they kind of they are what represent the toms in my arrangement. So they sound like this. In fact, that's then with a filter later on, they come on a bit more boisterously like this. So part of the reason why it was so hard to get this sound out of a violin is because the violin is obviously very small. And in fact, here is the violin. If I just tap it to you now, I can't remember exactly how I made this sound, but as you can hear, it doesn't really have any bottom low end whatsoever. There's a bit of attack on the front of it, but it's not a very snappy attack, and the bottom end is practically non-existent. So this was a bit of a challenge to get right and get sounding convincing. I will just stop here by saying that the whole purpose of this exercise was not to create something gimmicky, not to create something that just sounded like a lot of violins tracked up and sounded like a violin. My intention was always to create something that succeeded as a piece of music for the scene, sounded like a piece of music that could, in theory, be used in the scene in real life. But I set my challenge of only using the violin to create all of the sounds. So with that in mind, getting the tom sound was, as I've just said, a challenge. So if I turn off all these effects you can see here and various reverbs and side chains that I've got going on, you'll be able to hear how the sound sounds without all of that. So as you can hear, it's kind of dull. Now, actually, I've got hidden here the original sound recording files. I think that these guys here. Yeah, there you go. So if I just unmute this for a second, this is the original recording I did for the toms. So that's the original. I then exported those. I've actually got more here as well. But I won't show you all of them. What I did was I exported them and then put them in contact here. And here they are. Now, as you can see, I've got 4 different instruments, and that's just 4 different versions of the taps. They are round robined as well. And I have 3 different velocity sensitivities. Now, I didn't actually end up using these 2 because I recorded it really badly and they were all overdriving, they were all clipping. So I only ended up using the lower velocity that I recorded, which is why I've put this velocity filter on here. But what I did after that, so if you want to hear that, it sounds like that, and then without all of this stuff, it sounds like that. So as you can see, I'm not going to go into detail of what each individual effect does. So with all of that placed on it, I get this kind of sound, which is far more like it. So again, I'm not going to go into detail of all of them, but the whole percussion package sounds like this. There you go. So actually, just the final thing, the low end thud was just a very gentle tap, and as you can see, I've rolled off all of the top end, giving it a boost around here, and a ton of other things going on. If I just turn all that off, you'll hear how it sounds. So I think that was actually doing something like this on the violin, very quietly, just to try and get a sort of gentle thuddy sort of noise. And then I had to put all of this stuff on to make it sound more like this. Sort of a whoop whoop. Cool, so that covers that low percussion. There is some high percussion here, which are more rhythmic-y elements. Well, I guess it's all rhythmic-y, but more top end sort of shakery kind of sounds. So one of the interesting sounds was this here. Now I achieved this by playing with the bow really, really hard, right up next to the bridge with this sort of the heel end, the frog of the bow, which is around here. And when you press in really hard and dig in, it gives this horrible kind of grating sound. So if I just turn the effects off for a moment, you'll hear this is how it sounded. So I just looped those little sections because every so often it merged into a normal sounding note, which I didn't want. So that just loops and loops and loops, and then I'll turn, I think it's just those 2 back on. That gives me quite a nice sort of tremolo noise effect kind of thing. This is probably one of my favorite sounds of the whole project, this one here. Now that was achieved by using the violin and a plectrum, a guitar plectrum, which I got somewhere, and strumming behind the bridge around here. Now it was higher pitched because the violin was actually tuned properly then, so these had a very high, ringy kind of noise. So I literally held it like a guitar and strummed it like a guitar to get that pattern. And then sort of fix the timing a little bit and put these effects on. Not much going on. I'll just turn them off. So that's that sound, and there's a bunch of others, but here's the package of them together. Cool, so that covers all the percussion. If I just plug it in with everything, you get this kind of stuff. Cool, so moving on to low synth sounds, low musical sounds in general. I'll start with this, which was a really cool sound. I like this one a lot. This is, again, played. I use vari-speed here. So vari-speed is where you sort of shift the vari-speed up to 100%, so everything plays at twice the speed or 100% the speed. And then you drop this vari-speed back down to 0%, and it slows down what you've recorded and also slows down the pitch. Lowers the pitch, sorry. So it sounds a bit like this. I'll just turn off all the effects first. Cool. So if I go into Contact, you'll see I actually recorded this just somewhere in the project. I'm not sure where it is now, so I can't find that. But here is the original recording file. I put it in Contact. I mapped it onto the Contact's grid so that first of all, when the tempo changes later, this sticks with the speed, the loop sticks with the speed. And I also mapped it across the keyboard so I can play any note I want, and it sticks with the chord that I'm playing. So that was a cool sound, but I wanted it to sound a bit more, I don't know, I wanted it to sound a bit different. I still wasn't very happy with that sound. So I then put all of these effects on. You've got a bass amp simulator, which comes with Logic, EQ, transient shaper, compressor, spreader, another EQ, and another EQ. And it ended up sounding a bit more like this. So I was really happy with that sound. It's a very nice sound. It actually sounds almost like a bass, I think partly due to the bass amp simulator. But yeah, I was really happy with that sound. Another one was the low staccato cellos. Now this was done by just recording some single staccato notes on the violin, putting them in contact and playing really low. So this is how it sounds without the effects. Kind of sounds all right, but then if I put all these effects on, cool. That's got all that nice kind of attitude that low grunting cellos have. So what else is in here? Then there are some other low distorted drones. I'll play this very quick. That's not the best version of that sound. Let's play. There you go. So again, this was just probably recording a low note, violin, drone, G. There you go. So if I turn off all the effects, you'll hear the original sound. So that's me just playing a low note on the violin, and then with the help of contact, I'm playing a lower pitch, so it sounds like that. And then I put all these effects on. EQ, Zebrify, which is like the effects side of Zebra from Yui, compressor, filter freak, spread, and finally a reverb, and you get like this. So that's cool. And the final sound that I'm going to show you from this section is low violin bends. Now these low violin bends, again, I just tune the violin down. This is far lower than it should be. This is like playing like an A. It should be up like an octave higher than that. Because the string is so saggy, if you actually play with the bow quite hard, it gives a sort of natural pitch bending effect. So I did that. I played a few notes. Again, put it in contact, put a couple of effects, not many effects on this, and then that gives you this kind of sound. So you see there's a very subtle kind of pitch bend in there. Just another cool low growly sound, I thought, which appears at various points. And that pretty much covers all of the low sort of synthy sounds. We've then got some higher synthy sounds. Again, I'm sorry that I'm going so quick. My intention isn't to really go into that much detail on how I created the sounds. It's more just to demonstrate that the violin has been used to make all the sounds. There's like a sort of synth here. I'm going to play it without the effects again. So that in itself is actually quite a cool sound. I really like that. That was achieved again just using a violin note which I performed. Unfortunately, you can't really see the waveform. There you go. That might have been a couple of, like a double or a triple track actually. Typically how I do it is I record it in Logic, I balance it, I might do a double track or a triple track, I pan it, and then I export a stereo WAV file, and then with that stereo WAV file I put that back into Contact, so it's a bit more of a complete sound once it goes into Contact. And then I put these effects on it, so there's like a trigger gate, a bit of distortion, and you get this sound. Cool. Okay, so the next thing is violins sounding a little bit more normal. That's all these brown ones here, so coming all the way down to here. So these are just violins that I would just have played in a normal way. I've not put them into Contact, not done anything like that. I'm just playing them as you'd expect. So as you can see, I've tracked them up quite a few times and panned them left, right, left, right, left, right. Just to give, well, we'll get into detail what they are now. So, for example, this here is the closest thing to a melody that appears in this cue, and that sounds like this. Cool. So again, that's just me playing the violin, not very well, but that's the intention, to sound a little bit out of tune and a bit weird. I played it down the octave, then up the octave, left and right, and then put these effects on. I then did some motors, some sort of semi-quaver motors, which sound a bit like this. Cool, so that's, you know, pretty self-explanatory. Again, there's loads of effects on. If I just turn them off on the string motor bus, it sounds like this. Not a huge difference, but it's a bit of a difference. Later, this is a really nice moment when the bomb comes up, the sort of the propelled grenade comes up, and then it comes back down. I did these sort of descended strings coming in one by one, so that sounds like this. We give that a nice idea of descending. What else have we got? And then right at the end, just some high suspended notes, just, you know, just to give a bit of tension. And that's it. There's actually one synth I didn't show you up here, this gated synth, which I really liked. Is it this here? Yeah. So this is like a gated synth, but I like the way it, that must be this one. Which one is it? This one here. I like the way the pitch bend down because it kind of gives a sort of Doppler effect. I'll just play that one for you. So I think, as you can see, there's tons of effects on this one, but I think I got this one by, I used a violin drone sample and I put it in a bit of software called Pull Stretch, and Pull Stretch is just it's a very odd looking piece of software, but it's really good at stretching and adding harmonics into wave files. So I quite often use it to, you know, if you play a violin note and stretch it out really like by, you know, 700 or 800%, it ends up not sounding like a violin. It sounds very unusual, and it also irons out impurities in a very, very nice way. So I've used it quite a lot in this, actually, in a few places. Going back down, we've now got sort of weirder violin effects. So there's this sort of harmonics. So this is like glissando harmonics on the violin going up and down. And then I've added a load of effects on here. So I'll just play that to you. So I actually used that at the beginning of this switching genre moment here as well. And without all of this, like that. And then just immediately underneath, I've got some sort of aleatoric pitch bending kind of things, which sound like this. If I go a bit later, we've got the same moment when the bomb is coming back down towards the car. And these are sort of more typical orchestral effect kind of sounding things. So these are like glissandi up and glissandi down. So I'll just play them quickly. That's cool. So obviously there's some effects coming on and off there, tremolo and stuff, and there's obviously a ton of reverb. Finally, the bottom section, I've got some risers. Now, I have actually found the original risers I did here. So I recorded all of these one by one. Oh, you can't hear them. Why is that? Because it's just turned off, yeah. So I recorded these one by one. I don't know how many versions there are, but they're panned left and right again. If I just turn off the effects for a second. Sounds more like that in the original form. Put all these effects on it, and then I bounced this down as a stereo WAV. And I hid them, and I went into Contact again, and I actually used a library which is pre-existing called Rev by Output. Now, I didn't use any of the sounds that Rev have created, of course, sticking to my principle. I just got my stereo WAV file, here it is, and just put it at the bottom of all of their samples. So I just put it down here. violin riser with tail. And the reason I did that is because I like this interface, and it's got a bunch of built-in effects like the stutter gate and motion delays and stuff, and I just wanted to make use of that. I probably could have recreated it myself in Logic, but it was just quicker, and I just fancied using that with one of my own sounds. So after I put it in here, that ended up sounding a little bit like this. All right, and then I've used it a couple of times. Again, down here, this is without a tremor, and I think this is a little bit lower in pitch. There you go. So I think that pretty much covers everything. I mean, as you can see, all the tracks have a ton of effects, and the master output also has a ton of effects, and there are loads and loads of tracks. There's side chaining going on. There's, you know, reverbs going on. There are various buses going on into other buses. It got quite complex, but it was all in an attempt to achieve certain sounds, all with the violin. As I've already said, I didn't want it to be a gimmick. I just felt that it was a nice experiment to see how much could be achieved with just a violin, and actually sounding like a successful cue. So I really hope you enjoyed my attempt at that, and I hope you've all enjoyed your own attempts at this competition, and good luck to everyone, and yeah, thanks for watching.